Welcome everybody to this World Satsanga held in July 2019 in conjunction with Kevin Moore and the Moore Show. And as usual, I thank Kevin for all his hard work in broadcasting the greater reality and the work he does to expose more of the greater reality to those individuals out there who follow him via his various different channels, the Moore Show and Moore Talk, which are on YouTube. And I thank him for assisting me in broadcasting and dispersing this particular satsanga as well. Okay, so we've got quite a lot to go through in terms of questions. I've got quite a backlog and I'd like to get through them, but we'll see what time's looking like, because obviously there may be too many to cope with, but let's have a look at it. First of all though, let's look at the agenda. Oh, before I start, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat. I've caught a little bit of a virus, I think, from one or two people, and although I've not got the same level of physical response, it does sometimes leave my mouth a bit dry, so if I cough once or twice, please excuse me. Okay, so the agenda is as follows. A short talk by myself on what is awareness or self-realization, and then we've got all the backlog of questions from people from basically from May and June, and hopefully we can get those done today, but if not, we'll put them into August as well. And then we'll go through the end of meet meditation, which is how to remove the links with another person and therefore become more expansive. Okay, so as a result of that, this is just to help us detach from people and basically assist us and help us to move on. Okay, so first part of this particular satsanga is understanding what is awareness or self-realization. Many people think that they are aware. Many people think they are self-realized, and the individuals who quote this either do or don't. And the Hindus call it you need to have a guru who is a preceptor. And what that means is that a guru who is a preceptor is somebody who is truly God realized. And to be truly God realized is one way of explaining self-realization or awareness. Now, awareness in general, it can be used as a word to describe people who are cognizant of things that are happening around them, whether it's just observing individuals around them in their environment, in observing changes to the environment, or observing how people interact with the environment and interact with them. And in terms of understanding things like if you're driving your car, being aware of the cars around you, or if you're walking in the street or in a city, being aware of the cars and the individuals on the sidewalk or the pavement that are around you as well. But awareness or self-realization from a spiritual perspective is completely different. It's not specifically being aware of there are other things in the greater reality that are above and beyond the gross physical or our incarnate state. It's more about being connected and understanding the level of connection to the point where that level of connection isn't just a purely intuitive perspective in terms of getting bits and pieces of the greater reality, bits and pieces of precognition, or shall we say telepathic communication with others. It is about being actively able to move one's consciousness out of the physical, so to speak, and into the greater reality where we normally exist. So it's about having the ability to consciously commune with what we are, our true energetic selves, or in the Hindu text, the Godhead or the Oversoul, as Dolores Cannon would describe it, or the higher self as we normally refer to it. It's being consciously able to commune with those aspects of ourselves and move our consciousness out of the body and go back to partial levels of communion, if you want to, with our true energetic self, Godhead, Oversoul, higher self, etc., or Source or God, and move away from the physical if we need to, because also just moving the consciousness out of the body means that we sometimes stay within the frequencies associated with the physical universe, whereas in real terms what we're trying to do is to expand beyond that, and that means we need to go above and beyond those frequencies associated with the physical, which are above the 12th frequency. So it's also about being able to move ourselves at will, consciously, Kriya Yoga allows us to do this. My Traverse the Frequencies meditation system allows us to do this, and understand and work with those entities and beings that are within these different frequential environments above the 12th, which are of course different universal environments. So this is what self-realization is. It's not a case of understanding something on an intellectual level. It's about experiencing it from an experiential perspective in a way that is, significantly more expansive. An example of that is when we're in the human body, we see things from the perspective of the head. We look through the eyes, we hear through the ears, we taste through the mouth, we touch through the hands, and sometimes the lips, or any other part of the derma, the skin. But that is a limited level of understanding. When we're in the energetic, we're not limited to those 5 senses. We have myriad other senses which we can work with and tap into and use to our benefit to experience, learn and evolve, and communicate with other entities or beings, or the true energetic selves, for instance. And vision isn't just limited to going forwards. It's a 360 degree sphere, which also changes depending upon where we want to be. We can move from one point to another point. We can go vast distances, from one end of a universe to another end of a universe in an instantaneous way. Not even the blink of an eye. The blink of an eye would be too long. So it's about changing the focus of our consciousness and where we place that consciousness, which allows us to move from one point to another point. And this would also mean moving within various different frequencies within the multiverse, associated with our evolutionary level. If you remember the history of God, we can move within basically within a plus or minus 3. This is having one particular full dimension as a datum. You can go up and down 1. I'll say plus minus 3, but basically it's within 3, within the constraints of 3 full dimensions. So this is where we can move around to. So we can move our consciousness within the frequencies, or within the universal environment supported by those frequencies, within a tritave, so to speak, of full dimensions. So if for instance, if we normally exist in the 4th full dimension, then we can move around the 5th and the 3rd. Okay, and the frequencies and the universes associated with those. Now that isn't that is a physical movement of sentience and energy. We can of course move around them from an observational perspective through all of the different frequencies associated with the multiverse. Movements of the sentience and energy within those 3 full dimensional conditions I've just mentioned is a function of the evolutionary level. Whereas we can still move around, move our sentience, or refocus our sentience in any part of the multiversal environment, provided we're taught. So self-realization is part of this as well. It's part of an understanding of who and what we are, and not just knowing it, but being it. For instance, if we say we're self-realized, but we can't understand the detail behind self-realization, then we're not self-realized. If we say that we understand how a light switches on, if you click a switch, but we've never actually done it ourselves, then we haven't experienced that. If we just told it, then it's a belief system. So it's an intellectual understanding rather than an experiential understanding. If, however, we go deeper into the understanding of flicking the switch and the light comes on, to understanding that there's a wire between the light switch and the light itself, and there's power coming from a power distribution board, such as a fuse board, and that power is coming from the national grid, and that national grid is supported by a generation system, and that generation system uses a certain level of technology to generate electricity. Then we start to understand by experiential and intellectual means the greater detail. If we've been part of the creation of these devices that create electricity, and part of the installation of the network, and part of the installation of the wires in a house, then we have a complete experiential understanding of of the system, and therefore we are self-realized of that system in its totality. Not just aware, we are part of that. And this is what self-realization is. It's being part of in a fully experiential sense, and therefore being able to manipulate those environments, or those energies that are supported by the greater reality, the frequencies within the subdimensions, within the full dimensions of the multiverse. So self-realization isn't just about intellectually knowing something; it's about experientially experiencing it. Individuals who are at this level are far and few between. You can probably count them on a couple of sets of fingers, basically. So be careful who you follow. Those individuals who say they're self-realized, most of them aren't. Most of them just intellectualize it and talk about it rather than be it or know it. And you can tell the difference between somebody who is self-realized versus somebody who just is an intellectual individual who is able to explain self-realization. It is a completely immersive, joyful, omnipresent, omniscient state of beingness. Okay, right, I hope that explains that. Let's go into these questions now. I'm keen to get through these. There's a few of them are basically just descriptive items. Let's go through. First one is from ME, and it's a question discussion regarding last Saturday, which was in April actually. Okay, so first piece is, I wanted to tell you how much I really appreciated the metaphor you used to describe our TES and the connection to our individual aspects, and the relationship to the word soul as a collective rather than individual. The link between the earth, forests and clumps of trees was a great way to describe the concepts of things being interconnected, where events are happening all at the same time, or concurrently is a better way of saying it. In this case, where information from our individual lives unfolding in our event space is shared back to the TES concurrently and simultaneously. Thank you. The discussion goes on further, and it says, this got me further wondering about the purpose of our existence in the individual human level. And in brackets, I think I'm an aspect. Well, you are. Most people are aspects if they're asking these questions. Shards don't tend to ask these questions. Shards can be very successful from a materialistic perspective within the Earth environment and other physical environments within the physical universe, but they don't tend to have the sentience associated with being able to question their environment. So anybody who is questioning their environment or participating in these satsangas is most definitely an aspect. Okay. So the question is, I think I'm an aspect, but then I could be a shard or a backfill. The answer is no, you're not. You're an aspect. Okay. It seems that the purpose of each life is to yield more about the info about the nature of reality back to our true energetic self. That's correct. This being said, and it's also evolving through that interaction and the information gathering. Excuse me. That being said, we collect as much information as possible as we can in one life through daily interactions. That can be translated into many different things, scale from positive to negative in the human life. Yeah, I mean, although positive to negative is just various different levels of experience rather than being classified as positive or negative. That is a human thought process, basically, but thank you anyway. You asked the question paraphrased about which life am I, the main one or some dead-end parallel existence. This was when we talked about, that we're all potentially we're not the mainstream existence. It's likely that we're not actually. There's various different parallel conditions that we create through our choices, and the question of which one am I is usually a bit of a thorny subject. So the continuing dialogue here is it the point that no existence is less more important or more main? All parallel existences gain growth through experience. The qualifying descriptions of good or bad are relative not only to this lifetime but also to a limited perception of the greater reality of past, present and future happening simultaneously. Yeah, if you consider it in terms of irrespective of whether you feel that you're the main existence or a parallel existence, it doesn't matter. It's what you do with that existence that matters, because everything is fed back into the true energetic self anyway. So even though we experience one particular parallel condition, or main condition, the case may be, or fractalization of a parallel condition, it is nevertheless real to us in this particular reality. Note that everything is a dream state in real terms in comparison to our normal existence. Everything is illusion in real terms. So this particular illusion to us is real. So if you think about how real a dream feels when you're dreaming it, then this is another level of dream basically, and one that we choose to experience to accelerate our own evolutionary progression on behalf of our true energetic self. So it doesn't matter really whether we're in one particular parallel existence or the main existence or a fractalized parallel existence. It's doing the best we can with that existence that counts, because it all counts. Okay, next question is, the question to me is not which parallel life I am relative to the rest of my true energetic self aspects, but how can I help to tap into the stream of knowledge that I'm linked into? Okay. With this chain of energy that connects us all to ourselves and to each other as parallel components of our true energetic self. So that's linked into that. To do so would allow easy access to greater understanding than that viewed from simply looking or from looking simply at things from my own aspects experience. That is a wonderful thought process and a wonderful aspiration. But if we were able to access all of the information from all the different parallel conditions that we're experiencing concurrently, we'll be in mental overload. In our current incarnate state, we have barely enough sentient capacity to cope with what we're doing now, let alone being able to cope with 3,000 or 4,000 different other parallel existences that we're experiencing concurrently. So my thought is that it would just distract us, and that we don't need to worry about it, we just need to know it's happening. And if we take one direction versus another direction, and we worry about whether we should have taken the other direction, don't worry, a part of us has already taken that other direction and has already experienced it and moved on. So don't worry about, so it's not worth worrying about really. It's just thinking in terms of having extra knowledge could potentially just confuse us. Okay. Next question is, can you elaborate on ways in which we can tap into this channel of information flowing to and from the tests from the concurrent parallel of past, present and future events? I presume meditation, but I'm looking for specific exercises we can do to increase this level of awareness. Things to exercise that consciousness muscle that is lying dormant within ourselves and our current physical trappings. That means body. Meditation is the way. I mean, don't forget that, as I just said, there's so much stuff there that you probably, it's like having, it's like using Google to search on something and getting 40 pages of information back. Which one do you choose? The one that's paid the money and comes up first, basically. And in this instance, the one that's paid the money and comes up first is the one we're experiencing right now. So the thing to do is to understand that although you can gain access to other information, it will be a limited sense because of our limited ability to work with the level of sentience we have now. But meditation is definitely the way, and use your intuition and spiritual or third eye to augment the focus. So you can use the traversing of frequencies work, or things like Kriya Yoga, Hong Saw, etc. Just chanting on, or simply focusing on, but not expecting an answer about a particular question that you're going to ask, and just waiting to see what happens, because the answer may come straight away, may come from a clear sentience perspective, clairaudient perspective, clairvoyant perspective, or from another individual that you interact with, or it might even come through a different media that you are interacting with, such as television, a magazine, or the internet. So just basically focus on an answer and be patient about how the answer comes. That will help. Okay. Next question is based upon from the same person, ME. Excuse me. Question and discussion regarding May's satsang, a topic on dementia. Based upon my own experiences with family and friends that have what was diagnosed as dementia or Alzheimer's, wanted to state the following observations. Dementias seem to happen to people that are closer towards the end of their life stages than those that are not within the last for instance, they're within the last 5 to 8 years of human life. Yes, and again, this is because the soul is departing, the aspect is departing, it's moving away, and therefore the level of sentience associated with the human form to animate it is reducing. Okay, so it's a reasonable observation. Dementias have effects of scrambling time in the person's ability to distinguish past, present and future, and this can apply to sounds, visual stimulus and general memories. Yes, that's true, and that's because when the aspect or soul comes back into the body, they are working on a superconscious level, so to speak. They're almost back into their normal energetic state of where they exist. So they do get mixed up because, of course, time doesn't exist for us, real terms. So coming back into a shall we say a chronologically based environment where things are not in parallelized or everything happening concurrently, having to separate them out is particularly difficult. Okay, so the question is here, based upon these observations, I ask these questions: do people with dementia have a breakdown between the barrier that we have that puts information into chronological time, past, present and future, that allows them to experience the greater reality as it actually exists, in brackets, all past, present and futures are happening concurrently and simultaneously? Yeah, I'll just explain that basically. So I've got ahead of myself. So in other words, as dementia is a dissolving of the barrier that we place between physical reality and the greater reality. And if this is so, is this happening to prepare the aspect for transitioning out of the human vehicle? It is happening because the aspect is mostly out of the human vehicle and is experiencing existence as it normally does. So, which is an instantaneous and concurrent and simultaneous way. And that includes everything that's been existed, will be existed, could exist, should exist, and might exist, and has existed. And so being in that environment, and then coming back to this physical where everything is in a linear way, is quite confusing. And because one is working in this normally concurrent situation, everything that's happened has already happened. And so there's no anchor point between, what happened last week compared to what happened 3 years ago compared to what's going to happen today or in 3 seconds time, for instance. So it's difficult for the individual who's experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's to relate to this chronological or linear way of existing, because the aspect or soul is existing in the state of beingness, so to speak, that is instantaneous and concurrent. Okay, well, thank you for those questions, ME. Very good, and I really appreciate them actually, because they're very deep thinking and very thoughtful, and it helps to explain and for all intents and purposes deepen all of our understanding as well, mine as well, because the questions actually make me go into different levels of understanding through channeling the information. So it's fantastic. Thank you. This question is from AB, and the question is: hi Guy, I have 2 questions. I have understood one should watch life unfold and find equanimity, I can hardly say that word, between good and bad, since there is no such thing. But if I just let things happen without judgment, I seem to simply disengage from life. If everything is being chosen for me and I'm just watching, I feel unconnected. How do I try in life without trying? How could I love others if I don't find myself loving them already? Is this would this not be an extraneous effort? Where should effort begin and end? If we are living in a detached way, it doesn't mean we aren't responsible for the way in which we interact with others and the things that we feel we should be doing. So it's more about not being so detached that we don't do anything and we expect things to happen in front of us or around us. It's more a case of being detached to the point of just dealing with things in an efficient and as a robust way as possible, and dealing with it. And that includes interactions with our loved ones sometimes, and also with individuals we interact with. And also, there's an old joke where a person prayed to God and said, I'm struggling with money, I need to win the lottery to help me move forwards. and the result of the meditation was that God came back to the individual and said, why don't you buy why don't you buy a ticket for the lottery? And the individual says, okay, I'll wait for you. months and months go past, even a year goes past, and the person still hasn't won the lottery. And so the person goes back into meditation and says, God, you said you were going to help me win this money. And God turns around and said, well, you've got to help yourself as well. Go out and buy the ticket. So there's something there which says, real terms, we do have to interact with the physical to enable us to work with the physical and allow certain aspects of the physical to flow. So when we feel we need to do something, we need to do something. When we feel we need to stand back, we need to stand back. If things are becoming frustrating or very hard to do, it's because we're trying too hard. If we're missing the boat sometimes with things, or they've happened, and we've missed them, it's because we've procrastinated too much. So we need to be able to understand how to work with the flow, how to go with the flow, how to not interrupt the flow, and how to augment the flow when it's necessary. Okay, so really it's about being disconnected from the personalization of things, whilst also being responsible for the things that are supposed to happen in and around us, and that we are supposed to interact with to assist in the interaction and the downstream functions of what we do and how it affects others as well. So I hope that answers that particular question. Next question is, I've read several concepts about the afterlife from modern days to Yogananda's to my own. This is but the information obviously from the Dialogues. Yogananda describes heavenly astral worlds that relatively good souls experience between lives. This seems in common to today's notion of heaven, but recently I read from him that most souls do not go there, but sleep unconsciously between lives and reawaken in their mother's womb. Bad souls even are tormented in hellish nightmares during their rest. This idea frightened me a bit, naturally, so also I don't think this fits in to how you describe the afterlife in the Dialogues, where the soul is fully aware of the dying process in departure to its life review and multiple versions of communion offered to it. Could you clarify this, please? Do any advanced souls go through a conscious afterlife process? You have to understand that Yogananda wrote things based upon a level of education that he had, the experience that he had, and what he thought people would be able to digest. So again, it's about understanding the level of detail that one can absorb, and that and one's readers can absorb. When Yogananda talks about these things, he's talking really about individuals who are immersed in their incarnate condition. And sometimes this information, which I believe at the moment is being rewritten or revamped and redistributed as the lessons, is sometimes misunderstood. You have to understand that Yogananda probably understood an awful lot more than he described to his disciples or his followers, because they wouldn't have been able to understand it, and so he had to bring it down to basic information. And so things like hellish nightmares or being stuck in astral worlds is basically because certain individuals link themselves to the earth still. Individuals who are going in back-to-back incarnations would stay within frequencies that are almost physical. Don't forget, the astral worlds are in effect still the physical universe. They're those things which are within the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th frequencies. And if the individual wanted to, the frequencies above what's considered to be the astral, which is the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th, but still within the physical universe. So it's about understanding that individuals who do back-to-back incarnations wouldn't go very far frequentially before they come back into an incarnation. So they would basically fall asleep or die in one incarnation and wake up in the fetus of another incarnation, for instance. Individuals who have hellish nightmares would basically be those individuals who are so linked into, karmically or whatever, to the earth that they refuse to leave it, and so they would experience the lower frequencies that are available to them, which would be the lower astral, where they start to see things like lower frequency astral entities who can present to us quite abhorrent images of themselves to try to distract us from seeing them, or try to give themselves power over us, for instance. So it's all about understanding the bigger picture. I'll give you an example of how to understand the bigger picture. When we read the Bible, we just read the Bible. and we understand things in terms of information that's there. But if you look at the way that Yogananda has described the Bible, some of the information in the Bible, there's a hidden information there. And so you have to look at the way Yogananda describes things to understand that there's more information behind what he's saying, things that he's actually saying. And that's because, in the 1920s, when he came to the Western world, in 1920 and departed in 1952, the understanding of spirit and the greater reality was so limited, it was unbelievable. We still thought of the ether as being what the next level is up. And radio waves were considered to be the ether, a few years beforehand, for instance, 50 years beforehand. So it's all to do with the level of education. So, in essence, if we are becoming self-realized, we're working on ourselves, then we will go through the state of understanding and awareness that is there in the dialogues. Individuals who are stuck or attracted to the earth frequencies will experience various different levels of limbo, or so-called torturous environments, because their aspect of their soul knows they've got to move on, but they want to stay. They think they're incarnated or want to stay. And those who going unconsciously between lives are those individuals who are doing back-to-back incarnations. And after they've done the series of back-to-back incarnations that they're supposed to achieve, then they will go through this life review at the end, where they understand exactly what they've experienced, how they've experienced it, what they've experienced in terms of the links between the lives, and how those lives have linked between them as well, and the things that they were supposed to do in one life, and how that success was then projected into their ability to be successful in the next life. So it's about understanding the depth and detail behind it. Don't just take one level of text as being the be-all and end-all. Look at all texts, because all the texts together provide the bigger picture. Even the Anomalies is only a very small aspect of what we experience before incarnation, during incarnation, after incarnation, and in the period of time in between incarnations, or recommuning with our true energetic self. So look at all the bigger picture, and also understand that some of this information is based upon the chronological condition of education, ability to understand, and expansiveness, and what has been taught the teachers, and how expansive their teachers were. So take everything into consideration. Good questions there. Thank you very much from AB. Okay, next question is from US. That wonderful individual lady who is translating this satsanga for us and transcribing it. Okay. I also believe that another lady, a lady called S.He, is also translating it into Chinese for the Chinese individuals in Beijing and beyond, who are also linked in with my agent Leo Shu. Okay, so thank you to SH as well. Right, the question from US is, when you're planning your future books, I would like to see if you would include some galactic history in your book on religions and spirituality. And why is this? We're not the only race that has religion or spiritual practices. Lisa Royale said the Lyrians were externally focused on outer technology and space exploration, while the vegans within the Lyrian system are more internally focused spiritual warriors. The vegans believe that self-sacrifice and self-discipline, in brackets, purify themselves through diet, breath, work, meditation, yoga, etc., using logic and reason, for instance like Mr. Spock in Star Trek, to control the ego, etc. Their impact is still seen in certain practices in Buddhism, Shintoism, esoteric Christianity, and nature worshipping on our planet. But both the Lyrians and the vegans were imbalanced in their ways, being focused on the outer structural form versus inner fluidity and formlessness, not both sides. Part 2 of this is, so we can potentially look at that. There's a book I'm going to write that's going to be called Beyond the Origin, and some of this stuff might be sneaking into that, because Beyond the Origin is a bit more like Beyond the Origin's current area of polyomniscient sentient self-awareness into its next lesser structure. But there's going to be other bits of information that come into it as well. And possibly some of this stuff will come into it from the book that's going to describe different religions and how it links in with my understanding of the greater reality, and how some of the other understandings have used different exercises, such as different yogas, to be able to allow the incarnate aspect to become higher frequency and therefore more expansive, and therefore gain access to these different environments as well. Okay, so thank you for that. And it's a good. I mean, all this is going to be transcribed anyway, and translated into Chinese as well. So I think maybe the wonderful lady M.O., who's translating the books into Japanese, might also want to translate them into Japanese as well. We shall see. And there's another lady as well who's translating things into Spanish. So maybe that lady as well would also like to translate them into Spanish. We'll see. Request is out there, and put it into the universe, and so shall it happen. Okay, part 2 of this is humanity will be part of a galactic federation type community sooner or later. It behooves us to know something about other races and how they operate or how they are able to evolve, describing it from a natural and higher perspective that you can provide like nobody else. Well, thank you very much. I think you're pretty good as well, actually. There's a lot of people out there who have lots of information. It's sorting out the wheat from the chaff, and it's sorting out the continuous, consistent information that is generated individually and without reference to other information that creates the natural and, shall we say, robust series of informations that are there, that are not collaborative or plagiarised, but are actually done individually, and therefore justify and back up the other information that's there. So just keep looking around and look for the different things that are linked together. Okay. So continuing this, rather than the light versus dark polarity war stories that most people are exposed to on their spiritual journey that leads them astray or afraid. Excuse me. This is an important aspect or part of humanity's evolution as a species as we continue to ascend and will get the opportunity to interact with other races. We desperately need a higher view on all this galactic and cosmic drama, which puts it into the proper context of evolution of souls in different forms at different levels of the physical universe. Yeah, I'm going to make a note of this, because some of this stuff is really quite important, because of course if you think of it in terms of the space-time consideration, which of course doesn't exist, and all of this has already happened. So we have to think of it in terms of what can we tap into that's already happened and bring it into this particular linear environment that will be able to explain more about this. And there are many races out there who are, again, very technologically advanced, and a bit more thoughtful about how they use their technology. And there are others out there who are also technologically advanced, but have moved away from technology and become more spiritually or inwardly advanced as well. I mean, there's a lot of individuals in different forms, in higher frequencies, are able to use both to the benefit of themselves and to other incarnate civilizations as well. So it's about understanding the plethora of different ways of experiencing, learning, and evolving that we experience ourselves as well, and how various different forms or form factors that we can incarnate into allow us to maintain higher levels of communicative ability, and therefore work on a more spiritual basis rather than being here. So we'll look at that. Thank you, US. Very, very useful. Okay, long series of questions here from JM. I think there's 12 here, and we're looking good time-wise. I think we're motoring. That's a British, I think, comment there. A bit motoring means we're getting on with this. Okay, thank you. JM says, one, in the Anne dialogue, she says that in pre-birth, that being forgets who and what it is and loses capabilities as a creator. This seems to answer my question as to whether we are really creators whilst in the physical. No, since we've lost that capability on the way in. Is that correct? Or is this referring to being creators in a different way? We lose our communicative abilities simply as a function of moving down the frequencies and losing our bandwidth, basically. So our communicative bandwidth disappears to almost zero, although having some trickle there, of course. There needs to be some level of connectivity with the true energetic self. But the ability for the incarnate aspect to communicate with the true energetic self is reduced to almost zero. So this is why we tend to forget, because in the period of time that the aspect is associated with the fetus and then becomes born as a baby, okay, the embryo, for instance, and then starts to associate itself with that form, the sentience that is projected into that that body starts to associate itself with the physical and the physical form it's in. So it starts to forget what it was. And this is a function. So there's two functions there. One is to do with immersion into the incarnation, and two, it's about moving into lower frequencies. And the lower frequencies removing the connectivity with who and what we are. So in doing so, we start to become more internalized to our incarnate condition rather than the wider condition of who and what we are. Okay. But we are creators still, because when we do things here, whether we sort of write a book, for instance, or work with wood, or work with metal, or work on guiding individuals, we're being creative. So the level of creativity it changes basically to one which is more based in the physical rather than the spiritual. Okay. So I hope that's still there, because we are still creators. It's just that the level of creativity is different, and the way in which we create is also different. Okay. Next question. At the end of the Dialogues again, you state that you have a niggling feeling that you are being pulled towards another function or existence, one that includes nature. What is that function, and are you still being pulled towards it? Yeah, I mean, basically what this means is that at that time I was feeling that with all of the nonsense that's happening around us, that being involved with nature is a more, shall we say, purer way of experiencing beingness. And actually this is also a bit of a prerequisite to the book that's called The Curators, which for a large chapter involved communicating with those entities that we call nature spirits or elementals, and so that's probably part of that as well. So it's to do with how I was working with the entities and the beings that are called the Curators, and work on the maintenance of the multiverse from an evolutionary perspective, and how we can work with it whilst we're incarnate, or whilst we're experiencing it in a disincarnate state as well. So that's basically what they referred to. Okay. 3. At the end of the Dialogues in the glossary, you describe a secondary incarnation and refer to the possibility of the primary incarnation being placed in stasis for the duration of the secondary incarnation, with the primary incarnation recommencing once the secondary incarnation is finished. I've studied your writings in some depth. In brackets, I keep recycling through your books. I think I do as well. And in this primary incarnation in this primary stroke secondary incarnation with stasis is an unfamiliar concept. Have you addressed it elsewhere? Can you expand on these concepts, incarnation within an incarnation, or have you already written about this? It's explained in some way in the book I'm working now, which is about healing. But in real terms, it's simply that we choose to decide to have another incarnation at a different frequency level, lower than the one we've primarily incarnated into. Now, although I said that the particular percentage of sentience associated with the primary incarnation is moreover, or more likely to be, one that's allowing it to just be maintained in neutral or tick over, so to speak, and therefore in stasis, there are situations where the primary incarnation has more sentience, let's say 30% of the sentience of that which is projected into lower frequencies, and so is able to operate in a more animated level of interaction with the others at its frequency of that its primary incarnation is at as well. So my continued information is suggesting to me that there are different levels of primary incarnation based upon the level of sentience that's maintained within it, if there are opportunities for, and that opportunity is being taken up to have a secondary incarnation. So the incarnation within the incarnation. Interestingly enough, there are various different references to some of the. I mean, I found out this by the way back in 2012 when I was answering an email to somebody who was asking me a question from one of my readers from Australia, and after that I happened to come across a dialogue that Dolores Cannon was having with one of her clients or her patients, where she was getting information from what she thought was the higher self of the patient, or the oversoul, so to speak, and it ended up being that it was basically, as I described, it was the dialogue with another aspect, or a higher aspect, or a primary incarnation of the aspect that is incarnate into the body that she was working with. And it was quite interesting that particular incarnation was in a different frequency within the physical universe, and was fully aware of the secondary incarnation that it was experiencing as well. So that particular individual sort of backed up the thought, or the idea that the primary incarnate condition isn't always in stasis. It can also be in an animated condition as well, depending upon the amount of sentience which is maintained within that primary incarnate state. The minimum is 10% to allow the primary incarnation to be maintained, but at around 10% of the potentially 2.5% of sentience that an aspect can have, is the minimum necessary to allow that particular vehicle to be maintained. But that 10% means it ends up being in stasis rather than being in an animated state. Okay. Some of this information is also basically presented in some of the presentations or lectures I've given about who we are and how we incarnate. So if you go onto the website and go into events, lectures, you'll find some of the lectures are on YouTube there. You can tap into. I think that one is all in totality is there, but the PDF files for the presentations are there as well. Okay. Next question 4. In Avoiding Karma, you discuss Earth-based karma. Is this the many tornadoes and wildfires or earthquakes that are hitting us now, or is this something different? Earth-based karma is basically karma that we create through our interaction with the lowest frequencies that are focused upon this particular planetary system, basically. We can in fact get karma in other locations of the physical universe. So we can get, for instance, Arcturian-based karma or Pleiadian-based karma, as an example. It's just basically karma that we've accrued as a function of being in a particular location within the physical universe. Okay, so in essence, it's not something we should be too concerned about. It's just that karma, we accrue karma in different locations. It's like saying I would accrue karma in San Francisco, and I can also accrue karma in New York, and I can also accrue karma in Sydney in Australia. That would be San Francisco-based karma, New York-based karma, or Sydney-based karma. It's just a location of where we accrue karma. That was what it was describing. Okay, number 5. In the history of God, you met Byron, the dragon entity. He had to frighten you away, but it didn't work. Thank God for that. Well, thank Byron for that. You told him that you thought all entities you told him that you thought all entities at that level 27 was supposed to be good, and he responded, "We are mostly." What does he mean? Are there non-good entities at level 27? Indeed, at all levels. And what exactly is a non-good entity? I need to ask the question here. Okay, it's really about understanding that some of these entities aren't so. By friendly, it really means willing to interact with other entities that are incarnate or a low frequency, because they see the possibility of misunderstanding and misdirection that we can achieve and pass on through interacting with them. So it's more like about their friendliness in terms of being in contact with us or interacting with us. Some of them have fun with us, of course. They like to give us information sometimes, which is by and large true, but also can be slightly off the centre line. So sometimes they have a bit of fun with us, just to sort of, shall we say, entertain themselves. But more often than not, what we classify as a non-good entity on these sorts of levels is basically because at these levels, entities are still early on in their evolutionary level, so they haven't quite got the idea of, for instance, if their true energetic self is at level 27, then they haven't moved on from an evolutionary perspective. So they're still quite selfish in who and what they are, what they're doing, and they still haven't really understood the concept of working for the good of everybody. So they could ignore us, be ignorant of us, or play with us, so to speak, for their entertainment. So that hopefully that explains that. And it's basically purely a case of, if the level 27 and those levels is where they naturally reside, then they're not totally, shall we say, evolved to the point of being able to probably even incarnate as yet. So that's something else to think about. Okay. Byron tells you there are many working on the Earth, and you're one of them. How many? Half a dozen, thousands? I think I've answered this in previous satsangas, but what that means is not specifically pure of which there are only a handful, but what it means is, and I'm basically of the pure I think I'm the Maverick, if one can gather, but most of these are captive and even hybrids. So if you think about captive there are probably a dozen or more. I'm being shown 3 dozen here, but in terms of hybrid there are thousands, because the difference, the amount of, shall we say, the percentage of omness or energy as associated with source entity energy is low, and there's various different percentages, and so there are thousands of those individuals who are, for instance, hybrid rather than captive non-captive or pure Those others, the captive as I say, there's probably 36-ish. What I'm picking up here, the non-captive they very rarely interact with the individuals on Earth, and the pure not many at all. So this bit is really about those individuals who are hybrid, basically, and that's what my understanding is now. Excuse me. Again, question 7, per Byron, time is finite because the source entity decided that when our departure would end and we would all be together with the learning experiences completed. So will all beings eventually complete their existences, and will the source entity graduate all beings regardless of their personal growth, or will the source force this to happen, or etc, etc, etc? This is to do with the evolutionary cycle. Eventually all entities and beings will have experienced all aspects of that which can be experienced from an environmental perspective, creativity perspective, evolutionary perspective, and interactive perspective within the multiverse. When that happens, they will all naturally commune with Source, and Source will detach its sentience from the energies that it currently exists within or without, and move its sentience within the area of polyomniscient sentient self-awareness that it is being allowed to work within the origin, and repopulate an area of energy with its sentience, and then we start with another evolutionary cycle, and then those entities, true energetic selves, for instance, that it's used previously, may or may not be re-individualized to experience the new environment that it creates, or doesn't create, as the case may be, within the next evolutionary cycle. So eventually all entities and all beings will have evolved to the point of recommuning with Source. I think that probably answered that question in a more concise way. Next question is, the SC says that he uses the 600th level as a buffer. Why does God need a buffer? And also the 100th frequency as well is also a buffer, if you think about it, with the traversing of frequencies, because when we get to the 100th frequency, that's when it starts to become interested in us as incarnate entities, in terms of how we commune with it and how we work with it. So it's to do with allowing itself to function and not get distracted with the work that its smaller individualized units of self are working with, and so it uses that as like a firewall or a fire break, so to speak, a buffer, so that it can allow itself to continue to do its work and also allow the other entities to do their work without disturbing it too much. Although the question would be, why would God not want to be disturbed by those smaller individualized units of itself? And the answer is, it's just simply a function of what it wanted to do. It's allowing itself to concentrate on its own stuff. When an aspect in its incarnate state is able to commune with Source or God, from any real level, but mostly it ends up in the 100th level or the 89th universe, then it tends to pay more attention, because the usefulness the evolutionary gain and progression through being in contact with Source at that level and here at the same time is more significant than what it would have been if it was at another level. So it's almost like sending out part of yourself, and it finds its way back. But where it's been sent to is in a maze, and it's deaf, dumb, and blind. So it's what have you learned from being deaf, dumb, and blind and finding the centre of the maze and coming back. That's why Source or God starts to pay attention to us then, because we've got more to offer it. Okay. Next question. Byron says that we're now at a point where we're almost at the critical mass necessary to allow us to raise the frequency of the Earth back to the levels it should be. Does almost mean like a few years or decades, thousands of centuries? I don't expect you to pick a date, but so many of these almost there predictions seem so meaningless. So what does this one mean? When I worked on that and was given that, it was looking like 50 or 60 years, or perhaps even earlier. But with the way we've moved down the frequencies, and the way we've enjoyed moving down the frequencies by becoming more materialistic, by allowing some of the more bizarre things that are happening around us, and then relinquishing our responsibility for them happening, such as some of our governmental decisions, for instance, and leadership decisions all around the world, then my understanding is that this figure of 50 to 60 years has now gone further away. At the moment, this is because it's based upon things aren't static. We are able to control our ascension, so to speak. And although we were getting towards a larger level of individuals who were alert, aware, and awake, and that was creating a massive triangulation opportunity, an inflational triangle opportunity, those individuals who are part of this have started to drop down the frequencies, and they've also started to lose their connectivity with the spiritual and greater reality. So this has now sort of dropped down. So my understanding now is it could be over 100 years away. So we have to be very careful on how we think, behave, and act, and try to compensate for those who are dropping down the frequencies and becoming more materialistic in terms of their thoughts, behaviours, and actions as well. More lower frequency, more karmic, so to speak. Okay, next question. A source centered in the history of God states this: everything was created in perfection to start the job instantly, to hit the ground running, as it were. The only changes, in brackets, to the universe, end of brackets, are what you do and your opposite entities have created, including the physical vehicle. What exactly are our opposite entities? Now that's a good question. Let me ask the question for you. Okay. Having gone into a different event space called pause and then meditated, ineffectively this means the opposite entities are the parallel versions of ourselves that are working in different, slightly different or dramatically different environments based upon our choices. So the opposite entities are really the myriad different versions of ourselves based upon our myriad and fractalized downstream decision processes. Okay. So next question: entities, in brackets, exist whose thought processes were so low that they could only gain experience of evolution on a very low scale, and this was by being part of larger objects that appear on all dimensions, such as planets. This is what you call the minimal level. This is when discussing the levels of life. Planets are lower than humans, animals, plants, and minerals. the lowest of the low. Are planets really lower than are planets really lower than minerals in awareness? Isn't Mother Earth a being of greater awareness than a human being? If you look at the size of the Earth and in terms of its mass and volume, and then look at the size of a human being in terms of its mass and volume, and then you look at the sentience associated with a human being, which could be a minimum of 2.5% of the sentience of the Trinity itself, but up a potential up to 30%, which is unlikely, but that's the potential, if one particular aspect is projected into the physical. And then you look at the size of the Earth and the potential sentience associated with that, then we are infinitely more capable in comparison to the Earth, because we're experiencing things individually in a microscopic way in comparison to the Earth. But we're also able to affect the Earth in a massive way, a macroscopic way. So it's to do with, and also the sentience associated with the Earth means that it experiences things and acts in ways which are significantly slower than us. So it's to do with the sentience and the processing power associated with that sentience in comparison to how the vehicle that sentience is housed within is manipulated or used, that allows us to understand how fast something can evolve. So a mineral in itself within the Earth would probably evolve faster, and does evolve faster than the Earth itself, because it's a smaller component of the Earth and may have an individualized function of sentience associated to it. Whereas the Earth itself is a larger entity, so to speak, that's been created as a function of the physical universe and has a level of sentience associated with it, specifically associated with maintaining its environment in a minimalistic way. So in essence, yes, Mother Earth is of a lower level of sentience than a human being, specifically because of the volume of what it is, from a scaled perspective, versus how it can move around and interact with the environment, versus how it can affect its environment in comparison to the almost omniscient level of sentience that human beings have in comparison to the Earth, and how we can move around the Earth, and how we could in this particular incarnate state move around the physical universe and affect the physical universe. And it's this level of sentience and the massive potential that human beings have, or we have as incarnated as a human being with our individual free will, is why we are, for all intents and purposes, compartmentalized frequentially and location wise within the physical universe, so that anything that is that could affect other incarnate entities in a sort of negative way, or a viral way, so to speak, doesn't affect them. This is why we're in quarantine, so to speak. Okay. Next and last question from JM. Thank you very much for these wonderful questions. I actually love reading these things, because these are questions that I never asked. So they're expanding my awareness and consciousness and understanding as well. So I'm really pleased. Thank you very, very, very much. Question 12. In discussing creating the human form in level of history, I'll start again. In discussing creating the human form level in the history of God, the first level failed, and the source entity explained that suffice to say that the errors that were being created both at the human form level and the master plan level was such that it was deemed necessary to change the method of reproducing the human race to something more robust. Just what was this master plan? Is it beings much higher than whoever created the human form, and how can they make mistakes? Aren't they well experienced? Well, the answer was, this is the first time we were going to, a vehicle was being created that was able to support a higher level of sentience at a lower frequency. But that level of frequency, although it's a lower frequency, was higher than it is now. And so the method of reproduction was to do with the ability of the incarnate aspect being able to separate out on an atomic level one series of atoms to another series of atoms, and so dividing the body into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And so the density of the body would have decreased by half, or by into thirds, or into quarters, or into fifths, for instance, in its ability to be able to create a different body and allow another aspect to incarnate into it. So that was the master plan. The thing is that the entities, or should you say the aspects that were incarnating into the human body at these levels, somewhat abused it, so to speak, and moved around and got, shall we say, addicted to certain states of sensory experience, thought processes, etc. And these things were passed on from body to body as they were reproduced. This information, or this level of, shall we say, addiction, was maintained within the body that was duplicated, and so the next aspect that came into it also absorbed this level of, shall we say, addiction, gained its own addictions, and when it decided to reproduce the body and duplicate it, the culminating effect of the addictions that were part of that body, those that it added to the energies of that body, were then passed on to the next aspect or soul that took it on board. So these things weren't particularly mistakes, but they were, shall we say, things that were created as a function of those individual aspects that use those bodies and sort of abused the opportunity for them, really. So when you're experimenting with these things, you expect individuals who are participating to behave in the correct way. And most individuals who incarnated basically ran away with themselves in terms of the sensory and low frequency thoughts, behaviours and actions associated with being in a particularly low frequency environment. And so it became a bit of fun, really, and also a bit of fun that took a long time to sort out. Okay. Next question is from DT, and thank you, Jane, for those questions. Wonderful questions, and I hope I've answered them in some level of understandable detail. Next question is DT. I was watching the Science Channel a while back, and the subject was black holes. They come in all sizes and shapes and sizes, and seem to recycle space material. Black holes seem to grow faster than normal, and was felt they gobble up unseen dark matter to grow. My question is, what is the purpose of black holes? My understanding is that there's two things. There's a black sun and a black hole. A black sun behaves in the way which science describes, in so much as it's got a super dense and localized condition which creates a high gravity condition. So that's a black sun. A black hole is basically a via point. They come and go. They're different sizes, and basically they are. We sometimes call them wormholes. Okay, they are basically a via point between one frequency and another frequency, and so they end up being an area of locally high frequency in a lower frequency that is in contact with an area of locally low frequency in a higher frequency, and so they are basically transition points. The thing is with these transition points is that things that are in the locale, such as planets sometimes, and even depending upon the size of the black hole, galaxies, can also translate or move from this higher frequency location within the lower, this locally high frequency within the low frequency environment, and move through as well into the locally low frequency of the higher frequency. And so you can see a transition of light, which is planetary systems as well, and or as beings as well. So they're basically natural via points that occur, and they're created and uncreated through frequential instabilities. Those frequential instabilities being created as locally high locations and locally low frequency locations. Okay, good question. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Excuse me. Next question is from MO, and MO is this wonderful lady who's translating the books into Japanese for us all, and so it's and MO is very linked into nature. So these questions are very good. Okay. First question is: do nature spooks make business trips to high floors of buildings if there are lots of plants in flower pots that need to be looked after? If so, how can we best invite them to a living space? nature spirits work with the plants and the flowers anywhere. If they are brought into a sterile environment, such as a building, then they are encouraged to grow and proliferate. If they're not supposed to be there because the energy of the individual is overcoming the work of the nature spirit or the elemental, then that plant dies. So if you find a plant that dies in your living environment, it's because you're not giving it the right energy. You're not loving it, so to speak. So you can invite them into your space by loving the plant and meditating on inviting them in and saying, can you come into this environment and help me help this plant thrive, and then just meditate on it, and they'll come. And you'll feel them as well, and they're wonderful energies. It's wonderful. Next question is, what are some ways in which we can help or support nature spirits with their work? Is there anything we can do as human beings besides making the effort to not pollute the environment and plant more trees? Well, that's the major way we can do it, is to stop polluting our environment, and that's not just things like, the exhaust fumes from vehicles like boats and planes and trains and automobiles, but it's also in the manufacturing processes as well. That's the major thing we can do. But also we can send them love and send them encouragement, so that they know that they're appreciated, and that makes a big difference. Okay. Next question is, how does blessing and thanking our foods affect additives and preservatives contained in foods? Does it cancel out the negative effects of those things if blessed properly, in brackets, without any judgment, ? Or do they still affect our body? Blessing and thanking for our food is basically thanking the animal or the plant for giving up its body or an aspect of itself to nourish our physical body, because we're unable to nourish our physical body through energetics. If that food has been preserved in some way, pre-packaged, and the additives that are there are used as preservatives, have been used, then we can meditate on asking for those additives and preservatives to be neutralized. But in real terms, the best thing to do is to avoid foods that have had additives or preservatives placed on them or within them. So the best way to negate the effects of additives and preservatives is not to buy them, not to buy foods that have been preserved or have additives in them. Keep them natural. Have foods that are grown in the ground without any form of pesticides, those sorts of things, or only if natural pesticides are used, such as the introduction of natural nature to do natural combative efforts, such as introducing certain insects to get rid of certain insects that are detrimental to certain plants. But those insects we introduce naturally die out when the insects that they are attacking have been eradicated. So it's using nature properly, basically. But thanking and blessing our foods really thanks the plant for giving up itself and the various components of the animal for being given up to nourish our bodies as well. So that's basically what thanking and blessing our foods does. It's thanking those entities of various different levels of evolution for giving up part of their incarnate condition to perpetuate our incarnate condition. What are the emotional causes of rheumatoid arthritis, and how can we deal with it? Is it more difficult to heal it once it's physically manifested? Arthritis is simply to do with resistance to being in the physical. That's what I've just been told here. It's almost, if you look at it from a completely physical perspective, it's almost rigor mortis. The physical body is in stasis, or wants to be in stasis, because we don't want to be here. So any form of arthritis is about not wanting to be here because it's too hard and wanting to leave. and this wanting to leave means we don't want to animate the body. And so the way to do it is to embrace being here and embrace the environment that we're in, giving thanks to being able to use this environment and the interaction with others within this environment to enable us to be able to progress from an evolutionary perspective. And from that position, you should be able to accept being incarnate and start to animate the body again. So that's what I'm being told. It's not something I've looked into myself, but as a piece of instantaneously channeled information, it makes sense. So try that. Just try to embrace being in the physical, and try to embrace wanting to be here and interact physically. You'll find that the body animates itself more, and you start to remove this stickiness or the body's desire to go into stasis. Okay. Next question: what are the best ways to achieve and keep pure mind and thoughts? In brackets, you taught me this, but it would be beneficial to others to know as well. Really, it's not being pulled into gossip. It's looking at the good in everybody, and being of service when asked to be of service, without complaint and without expecting reward, and basically, meditate on being pure, and only thinking high frequency thoughts, and having the high frequency behaviours and actions associated with them. So just think of it in these ways. In fact, what we'll do actually is we'll use this as a meditation for the next satsanga, ways to achieve and keep pure mind and thoughts. Okay, so that's a wonderful thought process. Thank you. I'm pleased you've mentioned that, because I think it's going to benefit people more in terms of a meditative process or a guided meditation than just me explaining what I've just done. Thank you. And the last question from MO is: I'm wondering if the collective issue of wars we have here on Earth is an end result, in brackets manifestation, of internal conflicts of individuals to the collective. Can we reduce the damage if we worked on ourselves and make peace with self and others around us? How can we stop wars? Would you share your thoughts on this? We can stop wars by stopping becoming materialistic from a thought process perspective. One-upmanship, being better than others, being right is the predominant cause of aggression between individuals or groups of individuals. You've only look at religion, and fighting on behalf of a particular guru, for instance, or teacher or leader, to push their views forwards is another means in which we have proliferated aggression and war. Because one person's guru is better than another person's guru, so to speak. And the answer is no, they're not. They have different aspects or different understandings of how to achieve self-realization or self-awareness, or how to exist in the physical but not beyond the physical, how to navigate through incarnation, not gaining any karmic conditions. This is excuse me, going to link into a question, the last question in a moment. So really it's about being content with who and what you are, thinking the best of everybody, helping those who require help when they need it without asking for any even words of thanks, and just understanding that everybody is a soul or an aspect in an incarnate vehicle is struggling to evolve through incarnation, and that everybody is effectively deaf, dumb and blind, and trying to make their way to the centre of the maze and back again. And just think of it in these terms. Conflict is based upon trying to be better than somebody else because somebody else's idea is better. Actually, they're all good. Everything is an experience which we should all experience. Everything is a way of being that we should all be, so to speak. The collective experience is better than the individualized experience. And one person's experience is not better than somebody else's, it's simply part of the collective experience. And once we understand this on an experiential level, we'll progress significantly. And wars will disappear, and we'll work in a more collective way rather than an individualized way. But that is part of our individualized free will. Okay. And the final question is from SS, who says, hello, thank you for very much for brilliant, insightful satsangas. the insight comes from the individuals who ask the questions, not me. I'm just the channel who hopefully gets some of the information that answers in some small way the questions. But thank you for those kind words. Next, that question is actually linked to the previous one, which is, I would like to raise a question about Muhammad and the history of Islam. As I know, Muhammad ordered to kill many people during his life, as instance in the case of treason of a Jewish tribe. He ordered to kill all men and women of this tribe. There's an exclamation mark there. So all in all, how can we justify Muhammad's killings during his life, and how can we call him a great master such as Buddha? My understanding is that a lot of the work of every spiritual leader is misunderstood by the individuals who are supposed to broadcast it, and so much of the information that comes through has either been rewritten based upon the thoughts and desires of an individual to try and redirect the understanding based upon a human condition away from the original teachings of that individual. So my feelings are that, and what I'm picking up here is that the order that Muhammad is supposed to have given to kill a number of individuals, men and women of our tribe who just happen to be Jewish, is a misconception based upon the idea of, try to remove their thoughts and try to give them an alternative understanding of how to become enlightened. If people decided that the best way to remove those thoughts and give them a different way of understanding how to be connected with the greater environment was to remove their physical bodies, then that was a complete misinterpretation. I can't imagine that an enlightened individual such as Muhammad actually ordered that. I'm picking up that isn't the case. It's a story that's been perpetuated based upon the desire of individuals who weren't enlightened, but nevertheless were using the teachings of Muhammad for their own ends. So I'm very much feeling that, look at Islam, look at things like the Quran, for instance, look at the Bible, look at the Vedas, look at everything that's out there, and digest it properly in a neutralized and helicopter view, and you will see that the information, although diversifies based upon the skill set of an individual leader to gain self-awareness or self-enlightenment in the true sense, may be slightly different. In comparison to those individual leaders, in essence, they're getting back to the same thing, and what they're experiencing is the same thing. It's just that they've found a particular individual way. For instance, my way is to use the traversing the frequencies. Yogananda's way was to use Kriya Yoga, because he was taught it by Sri Yukteswar, who was taught it by Lahiri Mahashaya, who was taught it by Babaji. There's a lineage there. When we get to higher frequencies, we can use different ways of doing it because we've got a head start, we've got a springboard to work from. But when we're a lower frequency, sometimes we have, for all intents and purposes, lower ways of doing it. For instance, in the old days, it took 30 years of dedicated practice for a yogi to achieve self-awareness and self-enlightenment. We can get to there in a few years now, sometimes in a few weeks or a few days. So it's about misunderstandings, really, and it's not specifically what Muhammad would have ordered, but the interpretation of that decree or advice, and then therefore twisted into the desires of certain individuals for personal power, and maybe even personal gain, is what's really happened, rather than Muhammad saying kill these individuals. This is what I'm picking up. Well, I hope that answers that particular question. Okay, so let's go back to the agenda now. So we've got an agenda on how to remove links with another person and therefore become more expansive. Okay, so we're doing well with time. So I want you to sit in your straight-backed chair and close your eyes and focus your spiritual or third eye on the area of the spiritual or third eye itself. or should I say focus your physical eyes on the area of the spiritual or third eye. And I want you to just visualize that you're in a room on your own, a white room. There's nothing else in this white room apart from the floor, white walls and a ceiling. There's not even a door. This is just you. And now I want you to materialize in this room an individual who you may have had an altercation with, an argument with, a disagreement with, a problem with, a dislike of. Somebody who is distracting your abilities to communicate with or do certain things in and around. Sometimes these links are links to the chakras, specifically if it is a link between ourself in this incarnation and ourself in the previous incarnation. And sometimes it's simply a link between two individuals as a single link. So if it's a link between ourselves in previous incarnations, whether that is a karmic link within ourselves or a family member, for instance, it could be that all 12 chakras, that's the 2 vertical chakras and the 5 horizontally opposed chakras, are connected together. So you may need to remove the connection from those. But in this instance, if it's another person, there's usually only one connection. Usually it's within in the area of the heart chakra, but not always. Think of this line between you and this individual as being an energy line between you. And that there's a connection on this energy line, on each end of this energy line, and there's a connection on your body and the body of the individual you're linked with. Think of this energy line like an electric cord or electric cable with a plug on each end. And on you is a socket that you would normally find on the wall of the house, for instance. Disconnect one end of this energy line or this electric cable by pulling out the plug from the energy socket that's attached to you, and then disconnect the energy socket, so the plug on the other end of the cable that's in the energy socket attached to the other person. Okay, this disconnects the cable between you. Excuse me. Now put that, or first of all coil up that, visualize that you're coiling up that cable, and then placing it in a bin, a recycling bin that you visualize that's by your right leg. And once you place this cord in the recycling bin, it dissolves and becomes back as part of the vast energy set that is the source. Now remove the plug that's attached to you in a similar way that you would remove a socket. remove the socket that's attached to you in a similar way that you remove a socket on the wall of your house. Visualize you have a screwdriver, for instance, and unscrew the screws that hold that socket onto the wall. Pull the socket out, the wall being you, of course, and disconnect the wires. You may need to unscrew a clamp or something that's holding the wires that is you to this socket. When you've undone those wires, you can just terminate those wires by folding them back within yourself or covering them in insulation tape. Then put that socket again into the recycling bin so it can be recycled by source into being part of its vast system of energies. Then do exactly the same thing with the energies that are associated with the individual who is linked to you. So again, visualize a socket on them and unscrew the two screws that keeps the socket attached to them. When you remove those screws, again unscrew the wires that attach the socket to the energies of the individual and then fold them back or terminate them in some way by using insulation tape or something. And then take that socket and again put it in the recycling bin that's at the side of you. Again, that will be recycled by source. So now you have two holes in the energy templates that is you, and one that's the energy templates of the individual you're detaching from. Visualize yourself filling these holes, one level at a time. You can do this by extending your root chakra, and then spinning your root chakra clockwise, and then filling the hole in you and the other person on the first level. Then extending and rotating the sacral chakra to raise you to the second level, and filling the hole that's on the second level of you and the individual that you're linked to. Then extend and rotate the solar chakra, and again fill the hole on this third level. Then extend and rotate the heart chakra, and again fill the hole on this fourth level for where the socket was on you and this other person you're linked to. Then extend and rotate the throat chakra, and fill the hole that's there where the socket was on you and the person you're linked to. Then extend and rotate your spiritual or third eye chakra, and again fill the hole that's on you and the person you're linked to. And finally extend and rotate the crown or head chakra, and then again fill the hole that's there, that's associated with you and that socket that was there, and again the person you're linked to and the socket that was on them. And then close your chakras one by stopping the rotation, and if you need to, just to contract their extension to their normal state. So stop the rotation of the crown chakra, and then the spiritual or third eye chakra, and then the throat chakra, and then the heart chakra, then the solar chakra, then the sacral chakra, and then the root chakra to bring you down to the earth level. And as you look at yourself and look at this other person you're linked to, you'll notice that the hole that was there no longer exists. Every energy template on all those levels is now complete, and the ability for any lines to be reconnected to you and that person are now removed. If we didn't remove the sockets, that connection could re-establish itself. But now we've removed the sockets, that particular connection can no longer be maintained. And so what you may see, what I see, is that individual just shoots off into the distance. It flies off into the distance, removing itself from our particular location, freeing us from that particular link with them. And in terms of our ability to work with them, it makes us more expansive, less fearful, less anxious, less limiting in our ability to work with them, or within and around the environment that they work within, and understand them better. Ultimately removing a fear, or removing a link, and allowing ourselves to become expansive in terms of our interaction with that individual, without having a link, a karmic link, a low frequency thought, behaviour and action associated with that person. Okay, so this being done, you can now slowly open your eyes, come back into the room, take a drink of water if you wish to help ground you, and bring you back fully into the room with your eyes open. So thank you for participating in this particular satsanga in July 2019. Thank you all those people for their questions. Wonderful, deep, seeking questions, which have not only delighted me, but they've educated me as well in terms of the information and the questions and the answers as well. Thank you for those people around the world who are joining into and participating in the meditation, and thank you to Kevin Moore for broadcasting this information when he has chance and time, because he's a very busy individual, on his YouTube channel and other methods of communication. So thank you to everybody. Looking forward to communicating and communing with you all energetically in August this year. And thank you for listening to this satsanga. Namaste, God's love to you all, and goodbye.